So welcome to your first of 3 creative projects for the semester. Please keep in mind that these creative projects are the most important projects that you'll produce for the course and that you really want to give them your full attention using all of the design fundamentals that we talked about in our design fundamental lessons like balance, contrast, value, and of course typography. Those kinds of lessons give you the building blocks to make the best possible creative work. So you want to make sure that you're using design fundamentals as you apply your Photoshop mechanics. During this tutorial here, I will be going over the Photoshop mechanics you need to understand to use the CD template file. You want to go ahead and open up the CD template file. You only want to use the CD template file that comes with Module 6. So if you don't have it, for some reason it didn't come in the download, go ahead and download it now. It will be part of your Module 6, at least it should be. And when you open it up, it'll look like this here. I will be showing you how to use this CD template, so please don't use any other type of template or try and create your own. So before we get into the mechanics or into anything else, let's just start by taking a look at what this project is. What you're doing is you're redesigning an existing CD cover from the ground up. So that means that you want to take an album that you have in your collection, and it could be any album really. Any genre of music is fine, but you want to go ahead and redesign it completely from the ground up. So here I've got an example of an album. It's Dreamtime by The Cult. And here, looking at these images, I can see a variety of different versions that have come out over the years for this album. And I don't want to use any of those. I don't want to take inspiration from them. I want to go ahead and reinvent my own cover for this project, using my own images or images that I find that I want to utilize for the project that I download myself. So of course, always give credit to any artist whose images you use, any photographer or any painter for that matter, whose work you incorporate into your design. Now, so for example, I would be utilizing the name of the band and the name of the album for the front cover, and the back cover looks like this. I would want to make sure I include my side panels left and right. And I would also want to make sure that I include the information that's contained on the back side, who produced it, all of the clerical data. Again, you can use very small fonts for these. One of the biggest challenges of designing a CD cover, and the reasons we're doing this project, is you have the experience of designing for a very small physical space. CDs actually fit in the palm of your hand. They're very small items, and so they give us an opportunity to design for a very small physical space. And of course, the track listing. The track listing here, all the songs contained on the album, and the artwork, of course, that you utilize to incorporate some design scheme that embellishes the artwork on the front and hopefully accents the artwork that you started with on the front. But more on that later. Let's just focus on now what you're including. So again, the side panels, the artist name, the name of the album, as well as the track listing and any clerical data there on the back side. Now let's take a look at ways that you can search for imagery to utilize in your projects. I'm going to go ahead and open up Firefox, and by opening up a new window, I'm just going to go ahead and do a standard Google search. So I typically use Google. You don't have to, but I would suggest it. Now, here's a couple tips when using doing Google searches. So for example, if I'm searching for images of flowers to utilize on my cover, I might type in flower images. All right. So what I want to do is come over to the images section of Google and then start looking at all the different flowers. But I also want to come over to tools and make sure that I'm using only the large size images first. So by choosing size large, the largest images will float to the front, and then the smaller images will come down after that. So that will give me an opportunity to go ahead and find the higher quality images easier and then make my pick. So when I sort this way, the lower I go, the smaller the images get. So that's one criteria you want to look for. You also want to just keep in mind that when you are looking for images, such as this one, for example, when you click on it, it doesn't necessarily take you to the largest version of that image. You notice that this image is supposed to be 8,000 by 3,000 pixels, and it's this image here is not. Let's see what would happen if I were to right-click it and choose Save Image As. Save that image to the desktop and open it up. I called it index. There it is. So if I open this up, you'll see that it's very tiny. And if I go to my inspector, you can see how small it is. This is a 300 by 100 image pixel. Pixel image, excuse me. And that doesn't cut it. I want a much larger image. So I should be getting something much bigger. So if I click on it and go to that image, I can click on it here. You'll see that, wow, it looks much bigger. But I'm not necessarily at the largest version of that image. If I go ahead and right click it and choose Save Image As, I'll save this one and replace. Okay. Now let's open up that one and let's take a look at the inspector once again. You'll notice that the image size is only 1920 by 800. That's not what I was supposed to get. So even though it looks like I've got the full-size image, I still don't. You notice there's another link which I missed. Get rid of that. Here, which is download original file. And if I open that up in preview, now let's go to the inspector one more time. Now I've reached my goal. I've got my 8,000 by 3,000 pixel image. All right. So just goes to show you, you can't just assume that you're downloading the highest resolution image just because you see it there. You need to make sure you follow it and double check your resolution to get your best quality. Okay. So hopefully that's been helpful in terms of finding images. Like I said, as long as you credit the artist, you can use any images you want for this project and multiple images. I highly recommend you use multiple images to create your artwork for your front and back covers. You don't want to just throw together one single image and slap some text on it and call it a day. You really want to try and create and sculpt something and try and showcase what you've learned with your Photoshop mechanics till this point. Utilize what you've learned in terms of layer masks and adjustment layers and all that great stuff. All right, so once you've gotten your imagery and you're ready to utilize it, you want to go ahead and set up the template properly. So what you should be doing is creating masks based upon these different elements. So for example, this is the front of the CD cover. This is the back of the CD cover. So if I were to look at this in practical terms, this is what I would be seeing. So, whoops. This here represents the back, the side, and then the front of the artwork. So you can see when it's open in the jewel case is what it looks like. Remember, CDs fit in the palm of your hand. They're very small. And they are designed to go in these plastic jewel cases. So it's a very specific size. This is what an empty jewel case would look like. Okay, so you want to make sure that we're designing for the proper areas. So in this case, this front over here would be the top, and the back where the track listing goes would be back here, and the side panels on the sides. So to mask for that, what you want to do is create layer sets or groups. So we create one group here, and let's call this the front, and we'll create another group and call it the back. And then let's make the side panels. I'm just going to do one, but you want to do both. So let's just go left panel. All right, to save time. All right, so here's the front. So what I would do is I would take my magic wand tool or one of the selection tools. I would go to the background where the template is at, select it, and then make a click here to select inside of that front, which represents my front cover. And I would then click on the group and add the mask. So once I've made the selection, I can add the mask, and boom, there I go. I've got my mask. Same for the back. I'll now click on the template first, go to the magic wand, click in the middle, go to the back, and then add the mask. Next up, the side panels, don't forget them. They're very important. You go to the back once again, select that area, come over to your panel, and then add the mask. Okay. So how does that work? Well, any photographs or artwork that I put inside these folders will then be masked. So it's important to utilize those. So for example, let's say I've downloaded a photograph, I'm ready to drag it in. So I'll just drag this into my artwork and you can see it goes into crop mode immediately. One thing here, I want to be sure not to distort the image in any way. So I don't want to stretch or warp the image. So it's very important that I click on this button here. If I don't, this is what happens. I get warped or stretched images that look like this or that. I'll be looking for that on your photographs. Make sure you don't stretch or warp your images. And the way to prevent it is to click on this little chain icon to lock it in so that doesn't happen. So then that becomes unwarpable. All right, so now I'm ready to go ahead and utilize this into that space. So I'm going to readjust the size. It's locked, and I hit the checkbox to accept it, the check mark. Now it's floating by itself, but I want this to be part of my front of my CD cover. So what I do is I drag this into that front folder, and now it's indented. It's part of that front collection, and you'll notice that it's been cropped accordingly. And so when I move this layer around, it always stays cropped according to that front cover. And so any other photographs I put in here, the same thing will happen. I can still scale them if I need to, but they're all cropped accordingly. So if I were to bring in photographs, say for example, I brought in the flower photograph, and I start scaling it. Again, I want to make sure it's locked, and then I start just finding what I want to use. And let's say, okay, now that is going to be part of it as well, but I'm going to bring down the opacity to blend it, or maybe I'll just do a mask and start adjusting the artwork that way. So if I add like a layer mask and start doing some painting with it, maybe I'll just paint a little bit of black or something just to give you an idea. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm using that folder to make sure that all the photographs that get utilized in here are doing what they should be. In other words, they're not going out above the edges of that particular area. So as I start to work with them, whatever I'm going to do, I'm just going to do is kind of a rough painting here just as a example. But you see, I'm not going outside those edges no matter what. So it just frees me up in terms of the workspace and makes it life a lot easier when I start to work with different images and create my artwork. So if I were to put a text layer in there as well, I can start to do that and make sure that everything comes together. In the space correctly. So I think what's important to understand is that working in a way that is organized and clean and makes sense just helps you be a better designer and helps you correct mistakes easier when you have a sort of workflow that you're following and you stay organized. Because when you start to, just start throwing elements and not really paying much attention to what you're doing, it starts to really show after a while, because then you have a harder time finding areas that you want to correct or change or adjust. And so this just helps keep you on track, hopefully, and helps you understand what it is you're doing. So, of course, when it comes to your design work, again, I'm going to be looking at design fundamentals. So you want to pay attention to all the little subtleties, the kerning, the leading when it comes to typography. So that means the space between the letters, make sure they're adjusted. Remember what we talked about with those lessons. You want to think about contrast. You want to make sure that everything is legible, that you're not competing with foreground and background elements. And this is why we looked at those fundamentals of design to make sure that you're communicating effectively and clearly. And that's hopefully what we'll achieve with our project. So, all right. So this is just me throwing 3 elements together inside the front. This is not good design, of course, but this is basically what mechanically you want to start doing when it comes to designing for this project, is to utilize masks according to groups and to mix and match your elements accordingly inside that area. Another thing I want to point out is that when you do your side panels, say for example this left panel, you want to make sure that your type is written out horizontally and rotated. So for example, if I were to put this type in this side panel, I want to make sure that I'm rotating it, not using vertical type. Don't use these vertical type tools for this, all right? Rotate it. So just use your move tool, use your show transform controls, and we would then go ahead and rotate this vertically so that it fits in there. And so that type is way too big, so I'm going to scale it down, but you see how that works? You've seen how that now is going to start to eventually fit. And what we're doing is using Roman characters the way they were designed, to go from left to right, and then just using vertical orientation to go ahead and put those in the side panels properly. Okay. So we would do the left panel, we would do the right panel, as well as the back and front. So keep that in mind as you start building your layer groups. You want to have 4 layer groups, one for the right, one for the left panel, one for the back, one for the front. Okay, let's take a look at some examples of student works, and let's talk about how they utilize design effectively. So I'll go back to Firefox, and I'm going to go to the course website. And we'll go to the student gallery. All right, so right off the bat, you'll see a couple examples here. So you can see that this student has effectively used and explored type elements against the background photograph in a way that's clear, easy to read, but also inventive and interesting. So you'll see that there's plenty of contrast between the lettering and the background. I can easily read the artist's name, John Mayer, and then I can also understand the difference between the artist's name and the title of the album. So it's not bland, it's not boring. There's multiple colors, there's contrast of value, contrast of color, contrast of size. Although the fonts are in the same family, they're different weights, so the artist's name is thinner than the title of the album. And there's some visual interest in the sense of how these words play against each other and how they utilize their relationship with the background space of his face and the suit here. So that there's a lot going on, but it's still simple and clean and easy to read and easy to digest. You'll notice that they've used adjustment layers to color the skin and give it this sort of magenta brownish hue, and use that also to change the relationship between the colors of the text and the skin. So that also ties in with the background, the back cover. So as we go to the back cover, you can see that the color elements are consistent, but it's not just repeating what's on the front. There's a relationship going on between the front and the back in terms of design elements, but the back looks new and original. So we've got these interesting use of lines going on to organize the numbers of the tracks. And also you'll notice that the typography, again, utilizing contrast of color, contrast of size to emphasize certain elements of each track to give it visual interest and to create an interesting shape around it, but utilize also negative space here very effectively so it's clean and easy to read. There's a lot of type thought going on into the artist name once again, but staying consistent in terms of font families so that there's a relationship between the front and the back, even though it's doing something different. And then finally, the side panels, once again, utilizing a similar font family, utilizing color contrasts that we've seen repeated, but doing it in a new and different way so it's not just a sheer repetition. So all of the elements here, the details, the production credits, and the name of the production company, everything is there. All right, so here's another example. In this case, the Beatles here. We have a really well thought out shape, logotype designed for this redesign of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And you'll see that there's consistency in color from front to back, but again, original photographs for each, different take on the design, but similarities between the front and back, but at the same time it feels visually interesting and new and original. Side panels are intact. There's attention to detail in the track listing and the kerning of the letters. The spacing is even. Good contrast, easy to read, good design scheme. So you want to think about these elements as you design. So some other examples, maybe now the student has inversed the elements, but they're still correct. In other words, the front is on the bottom, but it's still correct in the sense that it's still designed for the front. But here they're utilizing this texture of the different heads zigzagging as a background, as a repetition of texture, but you'll notice that the foreground elements are sharp and easy to read. They've used a duotone to create a color scheme that matches the back of this green, and again using contrast of font, contrast of size to differentiate between the name of the artist and the name of the CD itself. And then the track listing, once again, visually interesting, using and inventing an organic shape with the track titles one by one, while at the same time creating a sense of organization and a unity between these different track names by using the same font, size, and color, and sharing the same space. Side panels are intact. Okay, so those are just some examples of student projects. Again, the details there from the production, the copyright, the year, all that stuff is there. So hopefully this has given you the guidelines you need to follow for your first creative project. You want to go ahead and make sure that you really give it your full creative thought process, full attention to detail. Go back and look at the design fundamental lessons before you take on these projects. And don't forget the CD template file using the mechanics of Photoshop to make sure you organize and label each element correctly and get all of your images cropped and scaled properly without distortion, without degrading the image quality, and above all, starting off with high quality imagery, whether they come from your cell phone, your own camera, or whether you find them online via Google searches. You can use photographs or artwork from anywhere as long as you give credit to the artist if you didn't take the photographs yourself. But just make sure that you find high quality images to begin the process with whatever artist, whatever album you're picking, whatever genre of music. It's wide open. You just want to make sure that you make it as good as you possibly can. And of course, email me with questions if you have them.